What is going on, guys? This is maybe the Stokastic MLB strategy show. Whether we're live or not, who's to say? All kinds of tech issues. It's not Tyler's fault. It's not really my fault or Adam's fault either. If it's anybody's fault, it would be mine. But for whatever reason, Zoom isn't working for me. It just wouldn't let me into the room. So hopefully you guys can hear me now. Hopefully this isn't too laggy or anything weird. But I think we've got this up and running. This is the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, shout out to our sponsor, Prize Picks. Adam, what is going on, and are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Watching myself talk is interesting because I'm like reading my lips after I say everything. But yeah, no, I can hear you. I think we're good.
All right, so we've already wasted 20 minutes of time due to dumb tech stuff. So just going to jump right into the slate, and we're going to start with the Tampa Bay Rays taking on the Baltimore Orioles. Jeffrey Springs on the mound for Tampa Bay, and he's been surprisingly good this year. Not somebody I was expecting anything from coming into the season, but a 26.6% strikeout rate, 3.01 expected ERA. He's starting to pitch deeper into games. What do you make of Springs in this matchup against the Orioles?
I think it's a pretty good spot. I mean, he's been good this season, like you said. He has a 26.5% strikeout percentage, 3.31 xFIP. He is pitching in Baltimore, so not quite as favorable as pitching in Tropicana Field. We've talked before, at least I have, about Baltimore's lineup not being quite as bad as I think people give it credit for. And you do have Santander back now, you have Mancini back, but still not a bad spot for Springs, and the price tag's reasonable. He's going deeper into games, like you said. I don't have any reason to dislike him here.
Yeah, and then, I mean, going up against the Baltimore Orioles as well, it's a somewhat favorable matchup. I've talked a little bit about recently how the park factors in Camden Yards is obviously more pitcher-friendly this year than it's been in previous years because of the change in ballpark dimensions. But with that said, at the same time also, as the weather's heated up, we've seen a little more offense come into play in Baltimore. So when we're looking at Springs, how high priority of a pitcher is he, and are you looking to stack against him at all?
I mean, I don't mind getting to some of these top of the order bats against him just because the top of the Orioles lineup is pretty solid with Mullins, Mancini, Hayes, Mountcastle, Santander. I assume Rutschman's not playing today unless he's DHing, but those guys 1 through 5 all are solid hitters. So I don't mind getting to them here and there, but they're not really priorities for me against a solid pitcher in Springs. As far as him being a priority, you do have some good pay-up options in good spots today. You have Verlander against the White Sox. You have Nola against Washington. You have Alex Wood, not really a pay-up option, but similar to Springs, taking on Pittsburgh. So I do think that Springs looks like one of the better mid-range options, but you do also have some other guys that I want to get to for sure as well.
Yeah, Springs is going to be fairly popular today. He is expected to be 27% owned on DK, and kind of makes sense when he's at that 8K price tag. Moving on to the other side of the game, Kyle Bradish. He has clear strikeout stuff. He throws really hard. If you're just watching him pitch, you'd be like, oh, this is a legitimate prospect. But the results are never really there for Bradish. 22.9% K rate, 5.79 expected ERA. So that's been a little bit problematic when it comes to Kyle Bradish. He's only $5,700 over on DraftKings. I wouldn't consider him on FanDuel on a one-pitcher site. But is there any reason to get to Bradish at a really cheap price on DK as an SP2?
I think that would be the reason. It's just the price tag. Like you said, the strikeout stuff is solid. He's at 22.9% for the season, 3.94 xFIP. He has allowed over 2 home runs per 9 innings. He is pitching in Camden Yards. There's obviously risk going here, but he's got solid strikeout upside for that price. And when you look at the other pitchers, priced around them, there's nothing that looks any better. So if you do need to pay down for pitching, I think that Bradish is where I would go. Like if you're going cheap SP2, he's only getting 7% ownership as well, which is nice. I don't think it's going to be any sort of a necessity that you have to pay down, but if you do end up in that price range, I don't mind gambling on Bradish.
Yeah, and then on the other side, when it comes to the Tampa Bay Rays going up against Bradish, they do have a 4.5 implied run total. So not super high, but still, it's certainly one that is decent enough. And then you look at the Tampa Bay Rays as an offense, they're projected for 9.9% ownership, so just under 10%, 8% chance to be a top stack. I'm probably would tend to be a little bit underweight to them if these numbers hold, slightly negatively leveraged, but still they have the 4th highest top stack odds on the slate. The only teams with higher top stack odds, the Phillies, the Giants, the Brewers, and then the Rays. So when we look at the Rays as an offense, is this a team you're looking to stack against Bradish?
Yeah, because right now they're not getting that much ownership. 10% projected ownership. 8% chance of being the top stack, 8% chance of being the top value stack. It's a volatile spot. Whenever you have a pitcher that has pretty good strikeout stuff, but also tends to be very home run prone and is pitching in a favorable park for hitters, especially, in Camden Yards, you had the left field wall moved way back this year, but right field's still how it has been. So lefty bats here against Bradish are still going to make a lot of sense. It's just a good spot in both directions, I think.
Yeah, so
Bruhan,
I think
if Bruhan's leading off at 2,500, that looks like a really good value.
Yeah, we've seen that a little bit as of late when it comes to him leading off, and he's been pretty cheap. The other day, let off, I think he was $2,100, so He's been a good source of salary savings. And then, of course, Bradish has struggled on the other side of the mound, so that would make a whole lot of sense as a value option. Moving on to the next game, we have the San Francisco Giants against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and overall for the year, Jose Quintana, he's pitched fairly decently, but the underlying numbers aren't all that great. Just a 20% K rate, a 4.87 expected ERA. The Giants have an implied run total fairly high at 5. The top stack odds for them, 10% with only a 6.9% ownership share. But Adam, how do you balance the Giants being an under-owned stack with the fact that they are infuriating to stack up because of the amount of pinch hitting they do during games?
Yeah, especially when you get them against a left-handed pitcher. That's when it really, I think, ends up being a bigger issue, because you're probably going to get this lineup that, has random right-handed hitters that are going to get pinch hit for later in the game, whether you're talking Austin Slater, Darren Ruff, potentially Wilmer Flores. When you get them against righties, I don't worry about it as much because they're better players. Their best hitters are left-handed. So I just don't. Like, those are the guys that you expect to be in at the end of the game, basically. Whereas when you get them against lefties, you're expecting as soon as they get the opportunity, them to pinch hit with guys like, Yastrzemski or whatever lefties are coming off the bench. So Jack Peterson, potentially. So that is an issue. You do have pretty cheap price tags. Austin Slater, if he's leading off at 3,500, looks fine. Darren Ruff is pretty cheap. I do like Longoria at 3,300. He's someone that just isn't going to be pinch hit for. So makes him look better. But I'm with you from a stacking standpoint. There's certainly upside there. They're a good offense. They're not getting a lot of ownership, but you do have to keep in mind that at least one or two pieces of your stack are likely to not be hitting after the 6th or 7th inning.
So then when you're actually building lineups with the San Francisco Giants, would you try to avoid the players like a Darren Ruff or an Austin Slater you think could be pinch hit for? Or is it just a thing where it's like, hey, I'm building a 5-man stack. If they score a bunch of runs, it's not going to matter as much anyway?
Yeah, it's that one. If they score a bunch of runs, it's not going to matter as much. There's also the chance, if they really go off and say they throw up, 10 runs in the first few innings, there's no real necessity to pinch hit down the stretch anyway. You can just give your main guys a rest. But then on top of that, too, it's baked into projections. Like, any good projection system is incorporating, you're projecting the number of at-bats, and any good projection system isn't just simply saying, oh, Austin Slater is going to bat 5 times today, because he's probably not. So that's factored in too. So I don't really want to double count it either.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it as well. A lot of these guys potential risks to be pinch hit for, but at the same time, there's upside, and also, like you said, would be accounted for in the projections. Now, on the other side of this game, Alex Wood is starting against the Pirates. Wood, one of the more popular pitchers on the slate on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Obvious positive matchup for him going up against the Pirates. Pirates also one of the lower implied team totals of the entire slate. So how high of a priority is Alex Wood as a pitching option for you?
He's certainly up there for me. I think him and Springs stand out as the two top mid-range options. Just a really good matchup for Wood facing the Pirates. One of the worst offenses in baseball. Their active roster has an 85 WRC plus, which is worse than every team in the league except for the Tigers, who are just on a planet of their own. The Pirates active roster also has a 25.3% strikeout percentage. Wood this year has a 23% strikeout percentage, 3.03 xFIP. Good pitcher, solid park to pitch in, great matchup, reasonable price tag. There's just not really any negatives for me to point to on Alex Wood here.
All right, so let's move on to the next game now. Try to make up some time for our tech snafus earlier in the day. Kansas City Royals, Oakland A's. This game is a pick'em. Not that high of an implied run total. The offenses aren't particularly good. The pitchers aren't particularly good. Brad Keller, 14.2% K rate. Cole Irvin on the other side, 15.7% K rate. Then also these are guys who give up runs. So I don't have interest in any of the pitchers. Do you have interest in either of the pitchers in this spot?
It's a pretty tough sell. If I had to make the case, it would be that, they're both inexpensive. Keller's 6,700, Irvin is 7K. Neither one is pulling much ownership. Keller's at 8%, Irvin's at 7%. They both have good matchups. These are two of the worst offenses in the league. So the argument for them would be, you're getting an ownership discount off of guys like Springs and Wood. They're cheap, but they're not guys that I'd be looking to prioritize because they are not very good at getting strikeouts.
Yeah, so I don't really want to roster either of the pitchers, but I'm not super interested in the offenses either because neither the Royals nor the A's have great offenses individually. One thing that does stand out at least a little bit is that we have the Kansas City Royals as being positively leveraged at least, 2.7% ownership, 5.5% top stack odds. So as a contrarian offense, I think I could be talked into the Royals for that reason. But still, it's not a great offense. Cole Irvin generates ground balls. This is a pitcher-friendly ballpark, so it's hard to consider them a high priority. Is there anything you really like from an offensive standpoint?
I think Kansas City is the more appealing offense just because, when you look at the A's, it's just where the hell do you even go? Ramon Laureano is fine. Christian Bethancourt's fine. Seth Brown, whatever. He's won me a GPP before, so I can't say anything too negative there. But the lineup just thins out in a hurry. With Kansas City, you at least have some power and some speed. Irvin hasn't allowed a stolen base yet this year, but maybe later in the game you can swipe a bag or two. But you at least have upside. When you have Bobby Witt, that's a massive power, and speed guy that gives you a really high ceiling. Yes, he's expensive, but he's at least really good. You get a strong catcher option with Salvador Perez. MJ Melendez, catcher outfield eligibility, lefty, but later in the game could get the platoon advantage. Whit Merrifield leading off is a solid option. Hunter Dozier has power. So with Kansas City, even though they aren't a very good offense overall, there's at least talent here, and there's a bit of upside. Whereas when you look to Oakland, not to say that they can't have success against Brad Keller, they certainly can, but there's nobody that I can even really make positive cases for other than it's baseball, shit happens, maybe they'll do well. Kansas City, there's at least guys that I can say I would actually like this guy in my lineup.
If you guys want access to all of the tools that we have over at Stokastic.com, you get access to a Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass. And if you sign up for the first time using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, that's all one word, all capital letters, you get 50% off your first month of our Platinum package. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. And by the way, that'll include everything like the player projections for baseball, ownership projections, top stack tool, top pitchers tool, stuff that is really important to me when I'm building my MLB DFS lineups. Moving on to the next game that we have on the main slate, the Miami Marlins against the New York Mets. Kind of a surprisingly low team total for the Marlins, in my opinion, only 3.5 runs. Taijuan Walker, 16.1% K rate, 3.96 expected ERA. The Marlins individually have been really good against right-handed pitching this year. So I don't necessarily really want to stack the Marlins, but I'm not really enamored with playing Taijuan Walker either. Where do you stand on the Marlins versus Walker on this slate?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting spot because, like you said, Walker just really hasn't been getting strikeouts this year. But last year he was when he was healthy, so I don't really know what to make of it. But he hasn't been very good so far. 4.18 xFIP, 16% strikeout percentage. Miami does have some power in their lineup as well. Jazz Chisholm at the top obviously is really good. But then, as you go down the order, Cooper, Soler, Garcia, these guys have some power as well. Not a team that I'm really excited to get to, but I don't feel super confident in Walker either. He is pulling some ownership at 17%. He's 7,500. I guess I would rather get there than Flexen, although you could certainly make the ownership case between them. Those are the two guys that kind of stand out in that price range to me, or at least in the top stacks tool. But I kind of just feel neutral about both sides.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable, and nothing's a high priority here. And if you're playing 5, 10, 20 lines, I probably wouldn't play any Marlins. I wouldn't play any Taijuan Walker. Large field, there's some that warrant a little bit of consideration, but I don't find anything to be massively appealing. On the other side, we do have some stuff to talk about. The Mets, one of the best offenses in all of baseball, going up against Braxton Garrett, who's been okay so far this year, 23.8% K rate, 4.07 expected ERA. The Mets yesterday went off and ended up scoring, 10 runs. It was the final tally for them. Pete Alonso hit a grand slam late, so not picking up much ownership, or not picking up much, 6.7% ownership, 5.1% top stack odds. I can't really prioritize the Mets against Braxton Garrett, but where do you stand with them? Maybe you see it a little differently.
I mean, I like getting to the Mets whenever I can, and right now they are not pulling much ownership, 7% aggregate ownership, 5% chance of being the top stack. Um, they're expensive, or relatively expensive, I should say. Marte at 4,500 looks okay. Alonso at 5,400, certainly happy to get to. Mark Canha's cheap, but yeah, just kind of a middle of the road stack to me. This is another game where I just like don't really have a strong lean on anything.
Yeah, I see it the exact same way, where there's nothing here I really want to prioritize. If you're playing 150 lineups, there's a little bit of everything that makes some sense, but nothing that would be a priority that I'd probably get to more than like a 5% clip or anything. So one of the least interesting games for me on the early slate. Moving on to the next one, the Houston Astros at home against Chicago White Sox. Justin Verlander is the main talking point in this game. One of the chalkiest plays on the early slate. Well, actually, the chalkiest play. A lot of people are flocking to him at pitcher, and it's easy to see why. 26.3% K rate, also has a 3.12 expected ERA. He's been one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's in the AL Cy Young conversation. He's 39 years old. He's coming off Tommy John surgery, and it has not mattered at all when it comes to Justin Verlander. So how high of a priority is he for you against the White Sox? Are you going to be loading up on Verlander?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to. He's 10,600. It's a good matchup against the White Sox. North of a 26% strikeout percentage this year, 3.45 xFIP. The White Sox have been surprisingly bad offensively as well. They're up to about league average now on their active roster with a 99 WRC plus, 20.7% strikeout percentage. They started the season off really, really slowly, but Verlander's still good. He's likely to go deep into the game. You never have to. Like, I'm never one to say, like, you have to jam in the most expensive pitcher on the slate. Like, he's 44% owned. If anything goes wrong, like, there's not a lot of margin for error at 10,600. But I think he's clearly the top option here.
Yeah, no pushback for me at all, and nor from anybody else. We've got Justin Verlander projected for 43.6% ownership, by far the most popular pitcher, but he also has the highest top pitcher odds of anybody else by a wide margin. So I'm going to be playing a lot of Verlander. I think he's impossible to avoid. Any interest in stacking against him just for leverage purposes?
Not really. There's enough offenses going here where I don't really want to get there. If you did, I think that where'd the lineup go? I can't find the White Sox projected lineup. Oh, there it is. Okay, so I think you're like the issue is like Luis Roberts 5,200. You would certainly want him in there. You want Abreu in there. He's 4,800. So like you're not really even getting cheap bats from the guys that you would like. That being said, the rest of the lineup is really cheap. Pollock, Vaughn, Jake Berger, Lurie Garcia. They're not very good, but they are inexpensive. But it's not a spot that I think I'm going to get to.
Yeah, same page as me. White Sox really low 3.2 implied team total going up against Verlander. I don't really want to be stacking them, but it's going to be hard to not want to stack the Houston Astros. Johnny Cueto, I get a 3.62 expected ERA isn't terrible, but I do not think Johnny Cueto has anything left in the tank whatsoever. The Astros should be able to score runs on him pretty much at will. You know, obviously it's baseball, so there's all kind of variance that comes into play, but this is crazy low ownership for Houston, in my opinion. They are only projected for 4% ownership, 7% top stack odds. If they are going to remain low owned, this is my favorite stack on the slate. Could you get on board with that?
Yeah, pretty easily. The thing with Cueto, like it's really difficult to talk about him because his stuff sucks, but he's just so weird as a pitcher. Like he just messes with your timing. It's like not something you can really quantify. So when he has success, it's just that he keeps guys off balance by doing ridiculous shit with his mechanics. But I'll still certainly take my chances on the Astros bats. They're expensive, and that's what's driving the ownership down. They only have about a 1% chance of being the top value stack, but a 7% chance of being the top scoring stack at 4% ownership. We've talked about, some mid-range pitching that we like. We've talked about some cheap guys that you can gamble on, like Kyle Bradish. I think that's where it comes into play. If almost 50% of the field is going to play Justin Verlander, that's going to drive down the Houston stacks as well, because it's just going to be difficult to get Verlander plus the Houston bats that you want at their prices. But if you live in that Alex Wood, Jeffrey Springs range, you go down to maybe some Taijuan Walker, take some shots on Bradish, you can very easily get to these Astros bats and still have, very solid lineups.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw yesterday they're going up against Giolito, who's a better pitcher than Cueto. I know Giolito had all kinds of hard contact, home run issues this year. I still think he's better than Johnny Cueto, though. There's no reason for me to think that the Astros aren't worth paying up for against Cueto, and there's enough cheap pitching that I think we will be able to make it work. So Astros, that is going to be a high priority for me this afternoon. Next game on the slate to talk about, Texas Rangers on the road against the Detroit Tigers. Taylor Hearn on the mound for Texas, Ronny Garcia for Detroit. Neither of these pitchers have found much success this year, but is there any reason to think that could change and make either of these guys viable in GPPs?
For the Tigers and Rangers game?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, Taylor Hearn at 6,900, like, it is a good matchup. The Tigers, I mentioned it before, are extremely bad. 69 WRC plus, 68 WRC plus this season, 24.7% strikeout percentage. Hearn has okay stuff. 19.5% strikeout percentage, 4.67 xFIP. I don't really see a reason to prioritize him outside of just taking random shots in tournaments at 4% ownership.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. But Garcia has a 28.1% K rate. Maybe he is somebody who could end up striking out a lot of guys long term. But I don't know. This is another game that I feel kind of similarly to the A's and Royals game, where it's like I don't really like the pitchers all that much, but I don't love the offenses. Are there any offenses that you really want to prioritize from this game?
No, there aren't. Like, if neither pitcher is great, so if you want to take a cheap Jonathan Scope or Victor Reyes or take some shots at Riley Green, minimum salary, one of the top prospects in baseball, that's all fine, but you can't really feel that confident in it because this offense is so bad. On the other side, I am a little bit more interested in Texas. They're basically a league average offense. They do have some power in their lineup. Corey Seager's pretty much always going to be a top shortstop option. Cole Calhoun's relatively inexpensive. Jonah Heim's a good catcher option. Nate Lowe's cheap. So Texas, I think, looks pretty good here. They are going a little bit under-owned as well. Detroit is much more difficult to get to.
Yeah, Detroit, not only do I hardly ever want to roster Detroit, they're picking up 7.5% ownership. So this is actually the fifth most popular offense on the slate. That's a little much for me for the Detroit Tigers. I get they're going up against Taylor Hearn. They're cheap, so there's reason to think there's value, but I don't really want to play a somewhat popular Detroit Tigers team. So that's a team that, for me, I'd like to be underweight to. Let's see. We've got 3 games left to talk about on the main slate, and then we'll do a recap of the night slate, which has 5 games as well, trying to make sure we get you guys all this information in some sort of a timely fashion. I know that we've got the 4 o'clock start today and then the other slate later. We've got all our normal content, MMA live before lock. We've also got MLB live before lock. So check out all that. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo. Our promo codes haven't changed, just the site name. Eventually, those promo codes will get changed, but for now, it's still Awesemo. And when you sign up using the promo code Awesemo over at Prize Picks, get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Really good way to help start building that bankroll. So moving on to the next game on the early slate, Milwaukee Brewers against the Cincinnati Reds. Jason Alexander is pitching for the Brewers, and I have very, very low expectations for Jason Alexander going forward. He has a 4.51 expected ERA to this point, which is not awful, but I just don't see any way this guy's going to find success at the big leagues when he only has an 8.1% K rate. He didn't get called up to the big leagues until he was in his late 20s, so that tells you what organizations generally thought of this guy before he got called up. I think this is a pretty good spot for the Reds offense. Do you think that they could get to Jason Alexander?
Yeah, I agree with you. There's nothing about him that seems particularly good. Even at AAA this year, 47 and 2/3 innings, 9 appearances, 7 starts, only struck out 17.5% of hitters. That's just not what you want to see from a guy coming up to the major leagues. And, Cincinnati's not the best team offensively. They have the 4th worst WRC plus in baseball at 92, but there's still some upside in this lineup, and it's a good park. It's a good matchup. India, Pham, Votto, Farmer, Senzel, like all of these guys, Moustakas is cheap. In this spot, I do like Cincinnati.
Yeah, and pretty modest ownership on them, 5.7% ownership. I get that the offense sucks, but it's still a big league offense. I'm not convinced that Jason Alexander is a big league pitcher. So I'm going to be looking at the Reds offense, a team that I have some interest in, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 8% ownership or something like that as a stack. So it's a team I definitely want to get behind. I have no interest in the Brewers pitcher Alexander at all. But then the other side, Graham Ashcroft. This is another guy with really odd numbers because 3.28 expected ERA, is limited base runners with a 1.02 whip, doesn't walk all that many guys, but only has a 12.9% K rate. So I don't like to roster pitchers for DFS purposes when they only have a 12.9% K rate. But does the amount of contact he allows make you want to roster the Brewers?
The park does as well. Milwaukee right now is third highest in top stack percentage. They are getting a lot of ownership though. But it's a nice combination of value and top stack percentage. 9% chance of being the top stack, 8% chance of being the top value stack, getting 13% ownership. So it's a team where you certainly want to be careful with what the rest of your lineup looks like. But at the same time, they look like a very appealing stack to get to. There's only one guy, or two guys rather, in the lineups north of 4K, or in the projected lineup north of 4K on DraftKings, and that's Yelich and Adames. Rowdy Tellez looks like a great value at first base. Urias looks good. Omar Narvaez looks like a good value at catcher. So the park, combined with the likelihood that you're just going to be getting balls put in play here, makes the Brewers look very appealing.
Yeah, one of the more popular offenses on the early slate, projected for 13.3% ownership. So the second most popular offense, the only one picking up more ownership is the Philadelphia Phillies, who we're going to be talking about in a second. But how do we compare the Brewers' overall odds of being a top stack to their ownership? Because like I said, they are expected to be really popular, 13.3% ownership, 8.9% top stack odds. Is that a number that you want to be over or underweight to, Adam, that 13.3% ownership from the field?
I think that, like, as a whole, I'll probably be under that, but it's still a team where there's a lot of good value. And that's the one thing, to keep in mind when you're looking at the top stack odds versus the ownership. And we've started to incorporate it into more so into the top stacks tool as well. When you have really good value, it means that, you can build really strong lineups around them as well. And then also looking at this team, looking at the individual ownership, you have double-digit ownership on Adames, Urias, Yelich, Tellez, Narvaez, Peterson. But Renfroe's at 9%, Taylor's at 5%, McCutchen's at 6%. So you can at least mix in some cheap guys that also aren't getting much ownership and pull down the total ownership of your lineup. So I wouldn't expect to be jamming in 5-man Milwaukee stacks at this ownership, but I do think that they're still low enough owned where I don't mind using them as 3-mans in lower owned, mixed with lower owned stacks, or if I'm using a lower owned pitcher, I can certainly go to Milwaukee. It's not like alarming ownership, even if they are going a little bit over owned.
Yeah, but they are negatively leveraged, but like you said, it's nothing totally insanely crazy. So we could still end up getting to them. And then also if you pair them together with maybe some lower owned batters from the end of the order, or maybe some lower owned pitchers, it is a way to make that offense look a little bit more contrarian as opposed to just being the stone cold chalk. There are ways to build lineups that aren't going to be crazy popular. And something else to consider also is this isn't like yesterday's slate where, there's the San Diego Padres project for 30% ownership. They're a little bit over-owned, but it's at 13%. So it's not like total crazy ownership. A couple more games to talk about. The next one, the Los Angeles Angels against the Seattle Mariners. The Angels played a very watered-down lineup yesterday. They had no Shohei Ohtani in it, no Jared Walsh. Robbie Ray pitched really well, but it was definitely something that contributed was just the amount of guys that were out for the Angels. I do expect them to have a little bit more of a full lineup today after resting guys yesterday. And they're going up against Chris Flexen, who has a 16.2% K rate this year, 5.26 expected ERA. So assuming the Angels have their full guys all out there today, what do you make of them? Because they are currently the most negatively leveraged team in the top stacks tool.
Yeah, like I kind of like the matchup because this is a team that strikes out a lot, but also has power, and you're facing a pitcher in Flexen that doesn't miss many bats. But the ownership's getting there as well. So that, certainly drives it down a little bit. And one thing that I do think is interesting, I kind of mentioned it before, but Flexen's not getting much ownership here. There are a lot of strikeouts in the Angels lineup. So if the Angels are going to pull ownership and Flexen isn't, wait, I'm seeing Justice Sheffield listed now. Oh, wait, they have doubleheader.
Is it not?
Yeah, no, it's Flexen. I think they must have a doubleheader or something. I'm kind of interested in Flexen in tournaments, just given that the Angels are getting ownership and that there are strikeouts in this lineup. If he can just navigate his way around Ward, Trout, and Ohtani.
Yeah, and It's hard for me to get behind Flexen though with just a 16.2% K rate. But let's see, what is some
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
data we have on Flexen?
yeah. And to
4%
be clear, like
ownership.
I'm not like advocating for just jamming in Chris Flexen, but he's 4% owned when you have, Taijuan Walker at 17% at basically the same price point. You kind of have the same concerns with Walker that you do with Flexen, I think.
Yeah, well, I don't like either of them, so
Well, yeah.
that's another way to. That's another way. I don't. Once again, if you're playing 150 lineups, you have a couple shares of somebody. It's not the end of the world, but for anybody who's playing 1, 3, 10 lineups, these are not pitchers I would be getting to at all. And then the Angels on the other side are going to be quite a bit overowned, so it's a team I would prefer to be underweight to. Then we've got Patrick Sandoval on the mound for the Angels, who's quietly been a really solid starting pitcher over the last couple of years. 22.9% K rate this year, 3.73 expected ERA. We have him projected to be fairly popular, though. 22% ownership. He's also priced all the way up to $9,100 on DK. Over on FanDuel, he is at... Where did he go on FanDuel? Oh, you know what? This game isn't on FanDuel. That's why. So we just have to talk about him from a DK purpose. And Sandoval, $9,100. So he's the fourth most expensive pitcher on the slate, also picking up ownership. He's a little bit too expensive for me and also a little bit too popular. But do you see Patrick Sandoval any differently?
I'm kind of surprised at the ownership that he's projected for. When I look at the pricing, I kind of thought he would be like the tournament pivot away from guys like Wood and Springs. I don't know, maybe it's just because he's just, landing in that that price range between them and between Verlander and Nola. But I kind of thought that you would see people prioritizing either getting up to one of the two true aces or going a little bit cheaper with Wood and Springs. If Sandoval's going to get similar ownership to Wood and Springs, I kind of have a difficult time getting there just because the matchups are more appealing for those guys. They're cheaper. Seattle's solid offensively. They have a 112 WRC plus this year. Sandoval's a good pitcher, like you said, 23% strikeout percentage. But I think he's just priced correctly, and the ownership's a little bit higher than I would like. So if it holds, I think for me, I just end up getting to a little bit more of Wood and Springs.
Yeah, I see it the exact same way. And just because Sandoval, he's so expensive and also pretty popular, I tend to think those numbers have to, obviously the salary isn't going to change, but I feel like the ownership could come down later as we get closer to lock. We'll see. We'll know in a couple hours from now. But just because Sandoval is so popular and the Mariners don't have a bad offense, do you have any interest in stacking them against one of the more popular pitchers of the day?
Yeah, I do. Just because, like you said, they're not getting ownership and they do have a solid offense. It's not, in terms of power, it's not the best. They have a 146 ISO this year, but going up against a pitcher that is getting some ownership, and then you just have France, Rodriguez, Suarez as like a nice 3-man that I don't mind getting to. After that, there's not a ton that really stands out. You'll probably have Abraham Toro at a cheap price tag towards the top of the order, but at least as mini stacks, I like the idea of France, Rodriguez, Suarez.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All guys that hit left-handed pitching fairly well. And actually, Ty France individually has had a quietly really good year. And he's been a fairly good hitter since coming into the big leagues. Kind of an unheralded, really high-end hitter who just hasn't been in great offenses over the last few years. So he kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But yeah, a guy who we've seen be capable of putting up 130, 140 WRC pluses over the course of a full season. Let's move on to the final game of the early slate, the Philadelphia Phillies against the Washington Nationals. And Aaron Nola is a potential pivot option off of Justin Verlander, also having a really, really good season. Also a pay-up option, but about half of the ownership that Verlander's picking up. 28.7% K rate for Nola, 2.78 expected ERA. The Washington Nationals offense, you have to work around the Juan Soto bat, but other than him, there's not that much firepower in the offense. How do you view Aaron Nola as a pitcher relative to Justin Verlander on this slate?
You led with it. I like him as a pivot to Verlander. It's a situation where I understand why Verlander's projected a little bit better, but I don't really understand why he's getting almost twice the ownership. It's very similar matchups. It's very similar pitchers in terms of their numbers. Nola has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 28.7%. It's like 2 points higher than Verlander. 2.9 xFIP, better than Verlander. 3.2% walk percentage, better than Verlander. 1.1 home runs per 9 is about the same. Nola has historically been better at home than on the road. But like you said, if he can just navigate Juan Soto and then, to a lesser extent, Nelson Cruz and Josh Bell, he shouldn't really have trouble with this Nats lineup. There aren't a lot of strikeouts in the Nats lineup, but there aren't a lot of strikeouts in the White Sox lineup for Verlander either. So when you have 44% ownership going to Verlander, 28 to Nola, I think you should just I don't think the gap should be that big. So that combined with Nola being $500 less expensive, I do like using Nola a little bit more relative to relative to Verlander if you are paying up.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And I mean, if you just look at the numbers and you don't take any, well, you look at the underlying numbers anyway, and don't include any kind of biases or anything like that. I mean, Aaron Nola, 28.7% K rate. Justin Verlander, 26.3. Justin Verlander is a 3.12 expected ERA. Nola, 2.78. Nola's probably been a little bit better than Verlander this year. He's pitching on the road as opposed to Verlander's pitching at home. But I mean, that aside, I think they've been at the very worst, they're comparable, and Verlander's nearly twice his own. So I do prefer Nola relative to the ownership on the two. So I think that if I was to build my lineups right now and that ownership would remain as it is, I'd probably be like inverse to the field, and I would be overweight to Nola, maybe a little bit underweight to Justin Verlander. Now, on the other side of this game, Josiah Gray is pitching for the Nationals. Really good strikeout stuff for him, 25.9%, but he gives up a lot of hard contact. He's a 4.68 expected ERA. The Phillies were massively popular as a stack yesterday, Adam, and they're going to be popular again today. The single most popular offense on the slate, although the top stack odds kind of indicate it's reasonable, 12% top stack odds, 14% ownership. How do you view the Phillies against Josiah Gray?
Very high upside offense. I think they deserve the ownership that they're getting. 12% top stack percentage, 14% ownership projection. They are relatively expensive. But as you said, Gray will give up some power. He's got decent strikeout stuff. He's struck out about 26% of hitters this year, but he's allowed 2 home runs per 9 innings. Against right-handed hitters, a 191 expected ISO, 352 to lefties. Just sets up as a ridiculously good spot for guys like Schwarber and Harper, assuming that he's back in the lineup. From a tournament standpoint, if you wanted to gamble on Josiah Gray, the issue is that he's $9,500 and in this tough spot. So he's only getting 1% ownership, but he was someone that, if you were like 8K, he'd be a really good pivot to Springs and Wood, but at 9,500, it's more difficult. I do certainly like getting to the Phillies here, though. Lefty power in particular. So Schwarber, Harper, Gregorius makes for a good option. Cheap Odubel Herrera's a good option as well. Obviously, you can play Hoskins and Castellanos too, but it's the lefties that really stand out here.
All right, so let's talk about the 5-game night slate. And there's a little bit of confusion in chat right now about the early slate versus the main slate because there is that doubleheader where the Angels are playing both the morning and the night. And by the way, I misspoke before because we do have the Angels game is on the main FanDuel slate. Patrick Sandoval, $9,600 on FanDuel, and Chris Flexen at $8,400. So both of them fairly expensive for FanDuel purposes, not ones that I could prioritize all that highly. But talking about the 5-game now, and let's just look at it this way. We'll look at all the pitchers, and we'll shout out what our favorite pitchers are going to be for this slate and the top stacks as well, just because we're so behind on time after the late start with some of the tech issues. So there aren't that many pay-up options for the late slate, and this is how bad it is. The second most expensive pitcher for the main slate tonight on DK is Cal Quantrill at $9,200. Over on FanDuel, if you're looking at the FanDuel night slate, it's a little bit different because it's only a 2-gamer, so it's hard to really compare it apples to apples. But for the DraftKings slate, you got Julio Urias at $9,400. Then it's Cal Quantrill at $9,200. How much of a necessity does that make Julio Urias for lineups?
A lot. I mean, he's getting 56% ownership for a reason, I think, and it's just that pitching is really, really, really bad. Like, the best pitchers in terms of talent other than Urias are probably the 2 guys going in Coors Field, so that's not very appealing. So it's just going to create a situation where Urias is going to pull a ton of ownership, and he should. You can certainly go against that from a game theory perspective. It's only a 5-game slate. And you can just pass a huge percentage of the field if Cleveland actually does well. But it's going to be tough to get away from Urias outside of just throwing in some Cleveland stacks because there's just no real alternatives.
Yeah, the pitching is terrible. And that's why I also think I'm going to ask you a nearly impossible question. Everybody's going to agree that their favorite pitching option for the night slate is Julio Urias. He's by far the most quality pitcher. Who's your second favorite, though? It sucks.
Yeah, it does. Like, I don't have an answer. Whoever's not getting ownership, really. Like, Cutter Crawford's 5,900. He was going to be my answer because he's only 5,900. But then he's also getting 23% ownership going against the Cardinals. Like, is he really that much better than just gambling on, Marquez or Weaver or Nick Martinez or anybody else? It's a slate where really, I guess I don't have like a strong preference. And when that happens, it's just much more likely that I end up just playing random shit that the field isn't.
Yeah. Almost by default, because here's what we've got: Cutter Crawford, who, people in chat are already making fun, like, who the hell is Cutter Crawford? The guy's name is like an NPC, Cutter Crawford. That's not even a real name. He's 5,900, though. At least he's cheap. Then you got Dylan Bundy. He's sucked this year. Cal Quantrill's pitching on the road against the Dodgers. Herman Marquez at Coors Field. Nick Martinez at Coors Field. Dakota Hudson, he's somewhat expensive, generates no strikeouts. And you got Luke Weaver, who also sucks. So I think that it makes sense to play a lot of Julio Urias on the late slate and then just spray and pray with the rest of the pitchers. If you're playing a bunch of lineups, I would spread it out and get a little bit of exposure to everybody. Like, there's nobody I would write off, and there's nobody outside of Julio Urias that I want to be all that invested in.
Yeah, my expectation is that I pretty much just like jam in Urias, maybe throw some Cleveland stacks in, but outside of those, jam in Urias. I do think that going to these Coors Field pitchers at their ownership and also at the ownership of the respective offenses is pretty appealing, just because, like Marquez has certainly had his share of issues this year. Still a 3.83 xFIP. Nick Martinez has a 3.99 xFIP and a 24% strikeout percentage. These guys are getting no ownership. They, I think, are pretty clearly the second and third best pitcher on the slate. The opposing offenses are each getting 20% ownership. I like the idea of just hoping that they don't suck, and then you're, the 40% offenses, 40% of lineups have one of those two offenses. Basically, nobody has the pitching. That's the route that I think I would like to take.
All right, and then let's start to talk about some of the offenses for the main slate, and then we will wrap up the show. So do us a favor, guys, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. But we've got a whole bunch of ownership going to Coors Field, right around 20% to the Padres, right around 20% for the Rockies. Padres slightly more popular, but at the same time, too, kind of looks warranted. 21% ownership share, 21% chance to be a top stack. So are you going to be on the Padres today as the most popular team?
Probably not, just because normally for me, my exposures kind of are either I end up playing a lot of the chalk pitching and then being different at hitter, or vice versa. Like, for example, yesterday I ended up not having a lot of the Padres because I just had so much Robbie Ray. I had so much Carlos Rodon. I had a lot of Frankie Montas. Here, I fully expect to be getting to a ton of Julio Urias. I don't really want to be playing Julio Urias plus the Padres. I think it's going to be difficult to differentiate my lineups doing that. So, again, I think it's more likely that I just kind of stay away from the popular Coors offenses, play more of the popular Urias, and then go elsewhere as far as bats go.
Yeah, I think that that's certainly sensible. The Padres, particularly depending what dollar buy-in level you're playing at, in more higher dollar fields, I expect the Padres to be super, super popular today. Same goes for the Colorado Rockies, whereas other teams should be kind of contrarian. So if you're stacking any team tonight that isn't a Coors Field offense, which team do you think offers the most upside relative to their ownership?
I really like getting to the Cardinals because Cutter Crawford's getting so much ownership. The Cardinals themselves are also projected to be a little bit underowned. They're in Fenway Park, which is nice. So I like getting there just because the way I see this slate is just such like just do the opposite of the field slate where basically every option sucks except for a couple that are extremely obvious and are going to be extremely popular. So it's more so to me about just putting myself in situations to when random variance breaks my way, I do well, as opposed to trying to predict who's actually going to be the best out of, Cutter Crawford and all these other pitchers. I would like, if you're going to play 25% Cutter Crawford, give me the good Cardinals offense that is projected to be underowned as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And Cutter Crawford, like you said, he's going to be popular. Cutter Crawford, one of the most popular pitchers on the slate. And then we have for the Cardinals, the third best top stack odds. So we are getting some leverage there against a popular starting pitcher. And then also by the same merits, we've got a team that has pretty good odds of being a top scoring team. So that is going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Sorry for the tech issues at the top. Still don't know what the hell happened, but I'll try to figure that out for later on in the day. Check out all the rest of the content. We've got MMA live before lock, MLB live before lock, before the 4 p.m. slate Eastern time. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a great rest of the weekend and good luck tonight.